There's a pattern that repeats in almost every organization, and almost nobody talks about it directly. When a company starts to decline, when the culture shifts, when leadership changes, when the work becomes harder and the rewards become smaller, the first people to leave are not the weakest performers. They're the strongest. The people with the most options. The people other companies are actively trying to hire. They see the signs before anyone else does, and they have somewhere else to go, so they go. What's left behind is a workforce that is, on average, less capable, less mobile, and less able to leave even if they wanted to. And here's the part that almost nobody says out loud: if you're still at a company after several of your most talented colleagues have quietly moved on, that fact alone tells you something important about your own situation. Not about your worth. About your position. And those are two very different things. To understand why this happens, you have to understand what makes someone a top performer in the first place. It's not just skill. It's pattern recognition. The same ability that makes someone excellent at their job, the ability to see problems before they fully materialize, to read trends, to understand systems, is the same ability that makes them notice when an organization is starting to decline. They notice it in small things first. Decisions that used to make sense stop making sense. Resources that used to be available start disappearing. Conversations that used to be direct become vague. Most people rationalize these signals away. Top performers don't. They've spent their careers training themselves not to ignore early signals. That's part of what makes them good at their jobs. So when they start seeing these patterns, they don't wait for confirmation. They start quietly exploring options. And because they're top performers, those options materialize quickly. By the time the decline becomes obvious to everyone else, the best people are already gone, or already halfway out the door. Now let's talk about what happens to the people who stay. This is the part that's rarely discussed honestly. When top performers leave, their work doesn't disappear, it gets redistributed. And it almost always gets redistributed to the people who remain, often without any corresponding increase in compensation, title, or recognition. In the short term, this can actually feel like an opportunity. You're suddenly handling more responsibility. You're more visible. You might even get told you're stepping up. But here's the structural problem: you're now doing more work in an organization that has already demonstrated, through the departure of your most capable colleagues, that it is in decline. You're taking on more risk in a weakening system, often for the same pay you were getting before. And there's a second, quieter effect. As the strongest people leave, the average quality of your peer group drops. The people you're being compared to, learning from, and competing with for opportunities are, on average, less capable than they were before. This can feel comfortable. It can also be a trap. If the signs are visible to top performers, why doesn't everyone leave? The answer comes down to three factors, and understanding them is important, not to judge anyone, but to recognize where you might be standing right now. The first factor is options. Top performers leave first because they have somewhere to go. People with fewer external options, whether due to specialized skills with limited demand, location constraints, or simply less developed professional networks, don't have the same exit available to them, even if they see the same signals. The second factor is sunk cost. The longer someone has been at an organization, the more they've invested, relationships, institutional knowledge, sometimes their entire professional identity. Leaving means starting over, and starting over feels like losing everything they've built. The third factor is normalization. When decline happens gradually, each individual change feels small. The person who joined 5 years ago and is still there has slowly adjusted their sense of normal so many times that the current situation, which would look alarming to a new hire, feels unremarkable to them. Let me show you how this plays out with a real example. A mid-sized marketing agency had built a strong creative reputation over a decade. Then a new CEO came in with a focus on cost reduction and operational efficiency. Within 18 months, 3 of the agency's most senior creative directors left, each one recruited away by competitors who had been quietly courting them for months. At the time, leadership described these departures as unrelated, individual decisions. 2 years later, looking back, a clear pattern emerged. Each of those 3 people had specific things in common. They had the strongest external reputations, the most portfolio-worthy work, and the most attractive professional networks. They were, by every external measure, the most employable people at the company, and they left first. What happened to the agency afterward? The work that had built its reputation slowed significantly. Several major clients left within the following year, citing a decline in creative quality. The agency survived, but it never fully recovered the caliber of work or client roster it had before those 3 departures. So how do you use this information about your own situation? The first step is to pay attention to who is leaving, not just that people are leaving, but specifically who. Departures happen in every organization, and most of them mean nothing. But when you notice a pattern, when the people leaving are consistently the ones with the strongest external reputations, the most in-demand skills, or the most attractive track records, that pattern is information. It's not gossip. It's not negativity. It's data about the direction of the organization, coming from the people with the best ability to read that direction. The second step is to honestly assess where you sit in that pattern. Are you someone who could leave if you wanted to, and are choosing to stay for genuine reasons? Or are you someone who hasn't left because the option hasn't fully presented itself? These are very different positions, and confusing them is one of the most common reasons people wake up years later wondering how they ended up somewhere they never intended to be. I want to be precise about something important here, because this conversation can easily be misunderstood. Staying at an organization through a period of decline is not automatically a mistake. There are completely legitimate reasons to stay. Maybe you're close to a major milestone, vesting, a pension, a project you genuinely care about completing. Maybe the role still offers something valuable to you personally, even if the organization overall is weaker than it was. Maybe you're using this period strategically, building specific skills, maintaining stability during a personal life transition, or positioning yourself for a specific opportunity within the changing structure. None of these are wrong. What matters is whether the decision to stay is a decision, something you've consciously evaluated and chosen, or whether it's simply the absence of a decision. The default that happens when nobody actively chooses to leave. The first is a strategy. The second is drift. And drift, over years, can take you somewhere you never would have chosen if you'd been asked directly. If you suspect you might be in the second category, drift rather than strategy, the path back is not necessarily to leave immediately. It's to rebuild the thing that top performers had, which is options. Even if you choose to stay exactly where you are, having genuine external options changes your position completely. It means staying becomes a choice again, rather than a constraint. Rebuilding options looks like this: keeping your skills current with what the broader market values, not just what your current role requires. Maintaining your professional network outside your organization, not as a betrayal of your current employer, but as basic career hygiene. Periodically testing the market, even when you have no intention of leaving, simply to maintain an accurate sense of what you're worth and what's available. None of this requires disloyalty or secrecy. It requires treating your career as something you're actively managing, rather than something that's simply happening to you based on decisions made by other people. There's a broader pattern worth understanding here, beyond any single organization. Throughout your career, you will encounter multiple environments, companies, teams, industries that go through cycles of strength and decline. The people who navigate this well are not the ones who avoid decline entirely. That's impossible. Every organization eventually faces difficult periods. The people who navigate it well are the ones who maintain enough mobility to make a real choice when those periods arrive. They can stay if staying serves them. They can leave if leaving serves them. The decision is theirs. The people who navigate it poorly are the ones who, often without realizing it, have let their mobility erode over time, until staying isn't a choice anymore, it's the only option left. The goal isn't to constantly be looking for the exit. The goal is to make sure the exit exists, whether you ever use it or not. Because the value of an option isn't in using it. It's in having it. The best people leave first not because they're disloyal, and not because they're impatient. They leave first because they're paying attention, and because they've maintained the ability to act on what they see. If you've noticed your strongest colleagues quietly moving on, one after another, that's not just news about them. It's information about where you are. And what you do with that information is entirely up to you. You might stay. You might be right to stay. But stay because you've chosen to, not because you've drifted into a position where leaving no longer feels possible. In our next episode, we're going to look at something connected to this: why the employees who get promoted during periods of organizational decline are often not the ones you'd expect, and what that reveals about what's actually being rewarded. Subscribe now. Because understanding these patterns is the difference between navigating your career and simply being carried by it.